Welcome back. I'm so glad that you're so excitedly chatting about all of this. I'm very happy. Okay, we're going to get started with the second part of our simulation. This is what we call the first resolution conversation. So there would have been, of course, an immediate disclosure to the patient. We would have, of course, talked to them. But this is, you're going to see the first time when we're going to explain to the patient what happened. And we are privileged today to have those that were actually involved in this scenario. So the claims folks and the physicians are actually doing what they did in real life. A little bit of the facts are changed, but pretty close. And some lovely patient actors here today. So thank you very much. And we're going to get started.
Mr. and Mrs. Chekhov, thank you for coming in to meet with me and with us.
Just push that away first.
All right? Okay. Mr. and Mrs. Chekhov, thank you for coming today and coming to meet with us. We've spoken several times on the phone. How are you doing?
It's okay.
Oh, okay.
Difficult.
Of course it is, and I'm so sorry. I'm just so sorry. We came together today to answer some questions for you and so that you can ask some questions, even just starting to ask questions. They don't have to be all today, but if you have any questions you want to ask. This is Toni Golan. She's the Chief of Obstetrics at the Medical Center. And Dr. Chi, you know.
Yes.
Of course. And so they're here to just start to help you understand what's happened and to, again, answer your questions, okay? Again, I'm sorry, as we all are, and I know this is difficult, so you just go at your own pace and how things go, okay?
Yes, I would like to understand what happened. I mean, how could this happen? This should never have happened to us.
You're absolutely right. And I'm so sorry for your loss, for both of your loss. It shouldn't have happened, and we take full responsibility for your care. We were in charge of your safety, and I know that what happened was not what any of us had expected or hoped for. We take this thing very, very seriously, and we look very deeply into why it might have happened, and we will do that. We can't replace your baby. We can't make up for what happened to you and your loss, but we'll do our best to understand and to explain, and also to think about things that we might be able to do better to prevent this from happening again.
This is what we know happened. I had scheduled you for a C-section because your baby was breech. His bottom was facing downward. In the office, we had discussed that this would be the safest route for delivery. When you went into labor early and arrived at the hospital, other doctors took over your care because I wasn't at the hospital that day. When the doctor on call was talking to you about delivery, she mentioned possible vaginal delivery, and in some miscommunication, thought it was your preference to try a vaginal breech delivery. I know that you did not understand that the baby was still breech, and instead thought the doctor was telling you could try for a vaginal delivery.
We thought that the baby had turned around. That's why we thought the vaginal delivery. And why wasn't all this the information, the breech, written down? I mean, why not written down in the record computer so that everyone knows?
Yeah, I can understand why you're upset. Your plan, the records, they were all available to the labor and delivery team. They knew your baby was breech. When you arrived to labor and delivery early, fully dilated, it seemed that you may deliver very quickly. And they offered you a possible vaginal delivery and mistakenly and wrongly misunderstood that this is what you might want.
I should have just said I wanted a C-section. I was scared to have C-section, so when the doctor said I didn't have to have one, I was happy about that. But I didn't know that the baby was upside down. I thought that something, we thought that something had changed.
This is not your fault. No matter how badly you might have wanted a vaginal delivery and avoided a C-section, we needed to make sure everything was as safe as possible for you and your baby. Our team did not do a good job communicating.
Let me take a moment to just explain some things that might be helpful to you. This is absolutely not in any way your fault at all. There was nothing that you could have done as a family to prevent this from happening. It was our responsibility to think through and give you the right kind of advice and to choose the pathway that we thought was going to be safest. When we think about making decisions in situations like that, we often think about whether someone has all the reasons or the features, or we go through a checklist to think about whether all the things are lined up exactly right for us to offer you a vaginal delivery. So when a baby is breech, coming bottom first, we have to make sure that there are certain things that are in place that make it okay for us to offer you that option. We need to know the size of the baby, exactly what kind of breech it is, what kind of deliveries you might have had before. In your case, you had had a delivery before, but it was a very small baby before. And there are other things that we think through to make sure that you're the right kind of a patient to have a vaginal breech delivery. And I'm afraid that in your case, we didn't actually satisfy all of those reasons. I also think that we could have done better to communicate that day as well. I know that your cousin was with you and they were very, very helpful in helping to translate, but I do know that in medicine sometimes we need actually a special kind of an interpreter to really translate what we're thinking as doctors and nurses, and maybe some of the messages weren't quite clear enough to you. And that's our responsibility, to make sure that we're sending you the right information.
Cousin was just trying to help. He's not, cousin wants to help.
We appreciate that, and we know, and it's not in any way yours or your cousin's responsibility to know this. It's ours.
Well, I have to say that this is quite literally the very worst thing that ever happened to us and our family.
I understand.
I know. I am so very sorry this happened. I was able to take care of you throughout your whole pregnancy, and we were all hoping for the very best outcome, and I'm very sorry we had this terrible outcome.
Thank you. It's good to hear that this is not my fault, because I was blaming myself for this, and
It's completely not your fault. Please let us take that burden away from you.
Not your fault.
Mr. and Mrs. Chekhov, do you have any other questions right now that you would like to ask the doctors? There'll certainly be other opportunities. I will make sure if at any point you want to, I've been your contact person, and I will remain that way. And if you have any other questions, I'll see that you can speak with them. But if you don't, they're going to leave, and we'll keep talking. But if you do, certainly, they're available.
I don't,
I
no more
don't-
questions,
no,
I don't think, no.
not now.
Thank you for meeting with us. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
You have my cell phone.
Again, I thank you for coming, and again, I hope that was somewhat helpful, or the beginning of some understanding. We've got a long way to go, I know. There are certain things that we can do right now, the hospital, to start to be somewhat helpful. there should be no bills to you at all for any of your care. Sometimes they slip through the mail. There's a department that takes care of billing, but should you get a bill, don't even think about it, put it aside, and you just call me. You have my number, we've spoken, so that there'll be no bills. But one of the things we also want to do when something like this happens is to speak with our insurer. Our insurer's name is CRICO, and let them look at the care that was given to you to see that it's looked at by someone other than the hospital, so that we can do right by you and we can make things as whole as we can make them.
What can this CRICO do for us? I mean, not going to bring baby back.
No, you're right. We can't bring the baby back, and I will always be sorry for that, and I am sorry. But there are other considerations that we'd like to speak with you about, for you to hear about, and it's not today. Today's not the day for that. But in order for the insurers to do this, they need to look at the medical record of your stay. But we would do nothing without your permission. So I was wondering, could you give me permission? I have some forms for you to fill out that would let them look at your medical record before they speak with you?
So, pardon me, is it like a-
Just to see, they want to see what happened that morning, what
to
did
see if there's
happen.
something wrong
Nothing
with-
that you did, no. We want to see what we did and what we can do in the future as well.
So this is to
But
help us,
this
not
is to help you. Well,
hospital
we
or
want to
both?
learn as well. Of course, we want to learn, but first, we want to take care of you. That's the most important thing. But I need permission for someone to even call you, to give me permission for them to give you their name, your name. Her name is Patty, and she would be calling you. And for all the conversations, on the phone or in the office, we will always have an interpreter available for you. And we will do this at your convenience when the calls are good for you. Okay?
That's
Does
okay.
that sound
Yes.
like?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Also, in situations like this, people often have an attorney, and that's a good thing. And so we'd like to know if you'd like an attorney, although I think you told me in one conversation that you did not want an attorney. Is that correct?
Not
We
now,
thought not
no.
now,
Not
we
now.
don't need
We don't-
one now. No,
Okay.
not
Do we-
now.
All right.
Should we?
No, this is your decision. If I can give you a list of attorneys, and at any point in this whole time, even when you're speaking with Patty, if you change your mind and you want an attorney, that's absolutely fine.
Okay.
Okay?
We do
So-
this, yes.
Okay, all right. So this is the form that you need to sign. You can take it home with you, or I'll sit with you now and the interpreter can help us with it, and you can go through it. This is and I will give this then to Patty. Patty, when she calls you, will reference my name, okay?
Okay.
And who I am, so that you'll know that it's her
Okay.
to speak
yes.
with you, okay? She's going to tell you and talk with you about what you can expect during this whole process. She won't have any answers for you right away, but she's going to talk to you about how we do this, and then if you have any questions for Patty, you can always ask them,
Okay.
okay?
Yes,
Does that
thank
sound?
you.
Okay. But again, if anything happens while we're waiting for Patty to call, if there's a bill that comes through or you have any other questions, you always can call me.
Call you.
Absolutely. I'm the only person you need to call until you hear from Patty. Okay?
All right.
Thank you.
And
Okay.
I hope that you fix this so it never happen again to no other family.
I hope so too. And again, my heart goes out to you. I am so sorry, and I hope we speak soon. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you. Heidi. Hello?
Good morning. May I speak with Mrs. Chekhov, please?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Patty Hanks, and I'm calling from CRICO, the insurer for Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. Heidi at the hospital provided your number to me and said it would be okay to call. Is this a good time for you to talk?
Yes. It's a good time. Yes.
Okay. I'm calling to explain the claim process to you. But Mrs. Chekhov, before we begin, I want you to know how truly sorry I am for the loss of your son.
Thank you.
I'm the person who's responsible for working with you through this claim, and I want to help you through the process since I can appreciate this must be a very difficult time for you and your family.
Yes, it is very terrible. We are not sure what we are to do.
Sure, I understand. Well, first, thank you for sending back the forms to us that will enable us to get your hospital record. We already have received the hospital record, but we still
Yes.
need your prenatal records. And once we have all of those records, we will send them out for an independent physician to review. And when that review is complete, I will meet with the physician. The purpose of that is so I can fully understand all of the care that you and your baby received. In cases like this, we like to work quickly, but I do want to provide you with a realistic time frame. This evaluation takes a few months.
Okay, yes.
We know we cannot reverse what happened to you, but we hope to work towards resolution so you can move forward in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Mrs. Chekhov, also, I wanted to ask you, it's my understanding you've chosen not to have an attorney, is that correct?
Yes, we do not want attorney, no.
Okay, that's no problem. It's your choice. We can guide you through the process, but if at any time you change your mind, that's fine.
Okay.
Also, if I need additional information, do I have permission to speak with your husband?
Yes, of course. Either one of us is fine, yes.
Okay, I'm the person that's going to work out all the details for you. I'll keep your doctor and the hospital in the loop, but I've dumped a lot of information on you today. Do you have any questions for me?
No, not now, no.
If you think of anything that you don't understand, or if you have any questions, please call me. I don't want you to sit with any unanswered questions.
Okay.
Okay, Mrs. Chekhov, take care.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye.
Hello, Mrs. Chekhov. This is Patty from Kryko.
This is Mrs. Chekhov. Hello, Patty.
I hope you're doing well. I wanted to let you know that we've completed our evaluation and want to arrange a time to meet with you and your husband in person to discuss settlement, to resolve this for both of you.
Okay.
I understand it's probably difficult for you to go back to the hospital.
Yes.
So I'd suggest perhaps I could arrange a conference room at your doctor's office. When's a convenient time for you to meet?
Maybe next Thursday would work?
Okay, that's fine for me too. I'll coordinate to make sure there's an interpreter present.
Thank you.
And I'll call you back to confirm the time and the place of the conference room. And thanks so much. I look forward to meeting with both of you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay, bye now.
The final outcome of this case is that the patient received a fair monetary settlement for the case within a year from the date of incident. The family was able to use the funds for alternative birthing methods and celebrated the birth of a baby a few months ago. All right. I just want to give a round of applause to all of the simulation experts. It's really tough to get up and act in front of people, so thank you so much. All right, and now we'll have the panel come up again, and we'll have a discussion about what you just saw, again with some questions from the audience as well.
So we really have two parts, right? Let's talk first about I hate the use of the term disclosure, but the disclosure conversation. What do you think went well? Terry?
pull this forward so that everybody can hear me. I think that what went well is that there was empathy, there was apology, there was a sharing of information, and that, for lack of better terminology, nobody threw anybody under the bus. When the question came about is regarding the documentation, how could this happen to us? There are some questions that just have no answers. You just don't know. And either you can say, I don't know, or it just happened. Saying I don't know is not a bad thing, because we can't always know everything. But at least acknowledging that's a good thing. And I think that's one of the things that went well, that there was empathetic communication with a sharing of accurate information to the best of everybody's knowledge.
Sue, how satisfying was that conversation, do you think, from the patient's perspective?
I thought that it went well in the sense, though, that somebody was talking to them. The father could vent, obviously, the anger and the pain, and people could sit with him through it, which has to be hard for the caregivers and the people involved. And but one statement he made is so classic, I think, from all the patients, myself included. When things go not as expected, is I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. And I think that's the gift of humanity, that even in your darkest of pain, there's always that part of us that says, I just don't want it to happen to somebody else. And to make sure the people in the room, they can't promise it won't happen again. But I always say to people, your case, your event will remain in our hearts, in our fiber of our being, in our hospital. And your baby or whatever issue happened will not be forgotten.
I think it's important to understand that these conversations are rarely a single conversation. And we train our staff into really basically three goals in the first conversation. Listen, listen, listen. The very first, so what you're seeing is a truncated version of probably several conversations that have happened. But the very first thing we want to do is listen. We want to give them some framework about how we're going to proceed from that point on. And sometimes a statement of what our principles are. It's not unusual to get a patient who will say, especially with the word risk management or the term risk management, that can be very off-putting. It's not unusual for a patient or a family member to say, I don't care, you're all smoke and mirrors, you're really here about protecting the organization. I don't ever push back when that happens. I always say, I have absolutely every understanding why you would think that. But, and it is true that as important as you are to me, you're not the most important patient to me right now. The most important person to me is the one we haven't hurt yet. And you need to understand, and I hope you will see through my actions, that my goal is to do right by you, because by doing right by you, only by doing right by you will we see improvement, and will we lower the risk that this ever happens again. And that is really why I'm here. So that's part of this, but understand that I think some of this has gotten truncated in our demonstration. Pat, are you happy with the way that went?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm glad you said about the truncated. You can only imagine that this wouldn't be a 5-minute conversation, right? So that we plan for a lot of time for these, and we didn't leave silences that you would leave in a conversation like this for everybody just to sit with the information and allow time for people to have additional questions answered. Sometimes we'll even have the patient representative in advance, so Heidi might in advance begin to have conversations with the patient and family about what are the potential questions that they might have to help them think those through, so that if they forget to bring them up at the meeting, she'll bring them up on behalf of the patient. But I think what you said is true, and is that we're truncating what could be several conversations into one very important conversation. But this would be much longer. And there would probably be more questions and emotion in the room than we had right now.
So the other thing I noticed is the delivering obstetrician and staff are not present. Why?
So in this, I'm trying to think, in this simulation, the delivering obstetrician was not at this conversation. And I think it was at the, but I'm thinking the reasons why, but I don't know exactly in this particular case. I would say that sometimes it's at the request of the patient and family about who's the best person that they want to see. So sometimes patients and families don't want to see the person who delivered the baby. So we use the patient and family as the guide. And we've learned to be better at doing that over time based on feedback that we've heard from patients and families who have gone through this, particularly by the Jennifer Moore article with Michelle Mello about interviewing patients and families after events. So one of the things that we'll sometimes do in the hospital in a paternalistic way is we'll say that, let's say it's a pathology. You tell me if I'm going too long, Rick. One of the things is, so let's say it's a pathology error. And we have some pathologists in the room, I know. And so one of the things you might say is that this pathologist might even say this, that the reason that you become a pathologist, you never thought you were going to talk to patients and families. But we might make the assumption that the person's either not emotionally prepared to have the conversation, or they are not the right person to have the conversation. But what we've learned over time is that it's likely that this is something that should be guided by the patient and family, and that their desire to meet somebody who might not be emotionally prepared is their desire, and that we should do that. So in this particular case, the delivering obstetrician was not there, but the obstetrician who knew the patient best was there. And I think we may have assumed that that was right for the patient, but I would hope over time that we're always finding out who would be the best person for you to have there.
That is very personal. There are times when patients will say, that is the last person I want to see. And there are other times when patients will say, I will not be satisfied until I hear from that
Right.
person. And it is really important to gauge that, because at this stage in time, though we derive benefits from these discussions, it is largely done for the patient and the family and part of that healing process. What I didn't hear was, and maybe it's because this is truncated, a closer explication of what was the thinking behind pursuing a vaginal delivery. And even though the delivering obstetrician wasn't there, I was waiting to hear a little bit more representation of that person's viewpoint. So that, because it's important to the family to be able to connect the dots, to know that this wasn't a completely random event, that once they can understand, it's amazing how forgiving they are, but you got to give them a chance to understand.
Yeah.
I have probably made every mistake you can make in 17 years, and I'm still standing. So one of the values of this is ultimately, I mean, you're tampering with people's lives, but it normally isn't life and death. You can make mistakes and recover from them.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me is the fine point that you walk when you're so clear about this being something that never should have happened. It has seemed to me over the years that can sometimes be something patients don't want to hear, that they don't want to know going forward that what happened to them was so senseless. How do you manage that? I mean, you want to be clear about responsibility, but do you really want to leave them to think that this was so senseless that it compounds their injury?
You are right. There are times when patients just don't want to hear it. And it's timing. Timing is everything as to when you discuss it with the patient. And for me, I ask the patient how much they want to hear, when they want to hear it. And it is more than one conversation. Because if they don't want to hear it today, on the anniversary of a death or a birth, they will want to hear it later. And it's up to them. I always leave myself available to them. And I'm always there to discuss whatever it is that I know. The other thing is, I never tell anybody, I know exactly how you feel, because I don't.
Right.
I'm never in that situation. And I tell them that it's their feeling and their emotions, and I could never walk in their shoes, but I am ready to share with them whatever it is that I have to share and whatever timeline they want to take.
Sue, there's been some recent research and new thought in the fact that victims of medical injury like this, preventable medical injury, suffer for years up the road. There is talk about whether we should be prepared to follow up at a year anniversary or 2 years or up the road. What's your thinking on that?
You definitely carry it with you. I'm 11 years out. Anytime I have to have a procedure, first of all, I'm at different hospitals. That's my choice at this point. So that's another factor people have to realize is sometimes the patient needs to change everything and start anew. I make sure that in my record it does state, and I'm not embarrassed by it, that I have a great deal of anxiety with procedures. That my total knee, I probably interviewed that poor doctor 18 times. And by the end of it, I got everything I wanted. By that I mean nothing I wanted was unreasonable. I wanted spinal anesthesia, not general. Thinking, again, still that mental of I'd be more alert. I don't even remember anything, but everything was respected. I had a procedure at MGH just 2 weeks ago. Again, a minor procedure, but for me it was major. And that people acknowledge, I know, you've had some stuff go on, and we're here and we'll answer any question, and to recognize anxiety is up there, very high, and it may be, and some patients who may lash out at you, if you go and look or ask, has something ever happened? They might say, oh yeah, my mother went through da-da-da, or this. So families carry that too. Anniversary dates, the date of my surgery is still tough. I don't work that day. I do whatever I feel like doing. Tears don't flow as heavy as the first year, but we remember everything. I remember, and for me the hard part is I remember how alone I felt. My joy is after 11 years that they never got rid of me. By that I mean I began visiting all the C-suites. It took a few times. People kept saying, it can't be as bad as she's saying. And then when you really had people on your side and they went, oh, it was. And, we had patient support, peer support. We were talking about, I could never understand what patients go through. I found the group MITS, who I generally feel saved my life, because I watched her on video that night and I went, oh my God, you feel like you're crazy. You are home, you're wondering what happened. My life changed quite a bit for a while. I had family pressure about, what happened, and anger. And my need for me was I wanted to speak to the physician, and he and I kept going together through the journey. All right, my family, we call them the tigresses. I have 3 daughters who did this when the poor, whoever would come in to talk to me. They took a camera into my room that night because they said, we already talked to a lawyer and he said get pictures. And I'm like, whose lawyer? What lawyer? What? So, you are dealing, as you deal with families, remember somewhere in there, you're dealing with, I had a struggle against my own family. And I did it my way, that's the song, against a great deal of pressure not to. And my joy, for me, the healing was that I made changes. And so I can't say that enough, and maybe because I was clinical, that I knew, being on the other side, that I knew from the moment I could get my head together that the physician was going to struggle with this. I had that gift of knowing that people were struggling behind the scenes. My family said, oh, it's another day for him. And I've heard that before from people. They don't realize we drive home that night going through a lot as the nurse in a case or as the physician.
So let me ask you a more pointed question. 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, recognizing that the word resolution can be very grating and offensive to patients, because these folks are never going to fill that hole that their baby's was occupying before the death. Would it be a good thing or a bad thing for them to follow up 5 years later to
I
see
think
how you're doing?
Each family's different, but I know with babies or OB cases, they treasure a note that someone sends to say, we know it's been a year, it's been 5, thinking of you. And I think for me, I would have appreciated somebody at I have my friends, but I would still today at 10 years, if somebody would call and say, just thinking of you, I know it's a hard month. You can't remember dates sometimes, the patient does. But I do think staying in contact, if that's what they want. Some people will say, I'm fine, I'm done, resolution comes. And again, if you need more care after the incident, it's a constant reminder. I get more care. Every 8 weeks I get Botox. People think that's lucky. But I walk around very fearful of, as I hit 65, is Medicare going to cover this? And I don't know yet. Those are the things down the line. No one's going to. So we carry all those little things. The loss of the baby's got to be the ultimate. But just to know that it's always there.
So when we speak verbally, we know that the recipient only hears a percentage of what we say. In my family, it's almost 100% they don't hear anything. Under these kinds of emotional circumstances, I can imagine that the percentage may scale and increase a little bit as time goes on. Pat, what are the pros and cons of putting it in writing at some point?
So we don't always put it in writing, but for some patients who request that the facts of the meeting are in writing, so I'll write it in writing. So what was the question, and here's how the question was answered. What was the question, here's how the question was answered. It's factual information that was discussed at the meeting. But most of those meetings that we're talking about here, there's not a written documentation. The exception, I think, where we are, of course, always writing documentations to patients and families are the things related, where it's standardized, that we have to, and that's around serious reportable events. So an event like this, where there's a fetal death in a low-risk mother, we would have communicated in writing with the patient and shared the information about our analysis. But we don't have it as a standard practice that we would communicate in writing with the family, unless they say, can you follow up with me? Or unless I really feel like it's going to be very important for them because they come with a list and they want particular questions answered, and I'll do a written document.
And if you put it in writing, is there a process by which you get it cleared with your attorneys or with CRICO?
No.
Where's our CRICO folks? Does that give you hives?
Yes.
It would give me hives.
But it's like we don't share with CRICO all of the resolution letters that we write to every patient who's written a grievance. We write them and we share information with patients in writing all the time. And if we had to do that and have everything reviewed by our legal department, which we do not do, or none of us are attorneys, or our CRICO, it would gum up the works. So we really it's a clinical conversation, so there's a clinical letter that gets written, and it's a lot of times from me or from Cheryl Toddy, who's there, or from the patient representative who's met with the patient. And I'm less worried about that. I would feel completely comfortable that somebody would take that letter to see their attorney because it's exactly what happened, and it's a clinical meeting, and it should be documented.
Sure. I'm sorry, I missed your name. Pat, what do you think about the practice of writing and sending the written conclusions, the clinical information and the clinical conclusions out?
I think keep it factual and, what you said in the meeting, and keep it factual without, using the words below the standard of care, keep those bright line statements out of it, and just that these are the facts.
Yeah.
So we almost always put it in writing.
Yeah.
And especially what we put in writing are the cases in which we don't think we made a mistake. Because we want our patients to know This is not an arbitrary blow-off. That we've thought about it, we have all of their questions, we have addressed all of these things. We usually get a written agreement on what the questions are. What are the things in your mind before we leave that meeting? We want to make sure that we've got everything that's going on in your head. And then we find that putting it in writing has been extraordinarily helpful on so many fronts. First of all, it forces us to actually confront our own logic. But secondly, it gives the families the ability to go back over and over it, share it with their own family, share it with whomever they want. And thirdly, it has been remarkably helpful when they go to other lawyers. And the lawyers now are 2 steps ahead. They already know what our conclusions are. Every once in a while, it's happened once or twice, they'll call and say, I'm reading this and I think you've missed something. I want to know that. I don't want to defend a case I shouldn't be defending. So for us, it's been very helpful. I've run into lawyers all over the country who think I'm crazy. It is, knock on wood, not backfired. We adopted some safeguards. I don't ever send a letter out that somebody else in my office hasn't also read, whether they know the case or not, just to make sure that I haven't gotten ahead of myself or said something offensive, which I'm sometimes capable of. So those things, because you have to live with that.
Yeah.
When the lawyers confront me about how dangerous they think it is, I always turn it around and say, but it's such an opportunity. It allows me to control the 4 corners of that discussion. There's no he said, she said later, because we've got a good, thoughtful documentation of that. So I think I personally advocate that. I want to turn to the legal conversation, or the settlement conversation, and especially focus on the whole issue of whether a lawyer should have been required in this case. Was it okay to deal with this family who elected to not have a lawyer? And what is your leverage in terms of requiring in some cases?
You want to take that?
Yep.
And then I'll answer.
From a claims point of view, if the family in this particular case chose not to have a lawyer, there may be other reasons. Let's not forget there may be cultural reasons why this particular family didn't want to see a lawyer, and this is something that we have to think about. But if the family trusted that we were open and transparent and that we gave them all of the information that we had available so that they could make a decision, I think that's enough, because the word lawyer kept on coming up and coming up and coming up. So it's not like they didn't have the opportunity to think about where counsel might be helpful to them. Personally, I actually like it in cases where lawyers do become involved, because there's always that assurance that somebody else has taken the time to explain it to the family, somebody who's not involved in the immediate setting. So, either way works, but you have to look at your patients, and it's on the individual basis. I don't think it's a bad thing that a lawyer wasn't involved. I don't think that there was any intent not to be fair with this family, and I think they felt that, and they had the opportunity to think about it. Months had gone by. 4 months, I believe, had gone by. So I think that's perfectly appropriate.
So let me share just a quick story. In 1972, a family delivered a baby at a community hospital outside Detroit, and there was a badly mismanaged shoulder dystocia. And the baby ended up brain damaged and shipped to Detroit Children's. And while this uninsured couple were sitting on the bed the day of discharge, an insurance rep showed up in their office and settled that case for the amount of the outstanding hospital bill, and actually got them to sign a release. They had no concept what they were signing. 10 years later, and I am now a 2-year-old lawyer, I get a lawsuit in with a motion to set aside that settlement. That's how I know about this. And the judge, of course, was appalled at what had happened. But here's the point I want to make. When your motivation is risk management, i.e. financial, you may be tempted to do this. And cheating a patient can be devastating to your program. Not only devastating to the program, but if your motivation is what I think it should be, out of a sense of building accountability and a sense of building an environment where we will be responsible for true mistakes, then cheating a patient is counterproductive to your care. This part of this case gave me hives. Because I kept thinking to myself, we are so close to being able to be second-guessed with a set of parents who are not English speakers, who are apparently or maybe not sophisticated, certainly not in the ways of English or the American law, and we're settling not an insubstantial case. In Michigan, we could not finalize a settlement of a death or a minor without going to court anyway. It's not a final settlement unless a court hears the evidence and approves it. We would have insisted on a lawyer in this case.
Yeah, we do.
For all those reasons, not just for the practical reason that we were going to get there anyway, but for the notion that the last thing I want is for any of our staff to be tempted to turn over a case on the cheap.
Rick, can you talk about how you do that? How do you do get them an attorney, that kind of thing?
Well, we have a list of lawyers. We don't have an approval process like you have, which is pretty remarkable as far as I'm concerned. But we do have a list of lawyers, and the way the characterization is, this is a list of top-flight lawyers with whom we have worked constructively in the past. And we privately know we don't doubt their ethics, we don't doubt their intentions, and we don't doubt their skills. The last thing I want is a divorce lawyer called in to take a flyer on a malpractice case. I need and benefit from that expertise on the other side. In this conversation, I probably would have said something to this family like, compensating an injury like this is an art, not a science. Mm-hmm. And you have some homework. I want you to think about all the out-of-pocket things, but I really need you to have a lawyer because I need somebody experienced on the other side to give validity to this discussion. And I literally would say to them, I've never had a patient refuse at that point. I did have a patient literally sign 4 contingency agreements with all 4 lawyers on the list. It was the darndest thing. I went, oh my God, I think I oversold this one. But Jeff Catalano, Melinda, would you give him the microphone? Would you talk a little bit about this from your perspective? Jeff's a very well-respected plaintiff's lawyer and somebody who's been part of this process almost from the beginning.
Thank you, Rick. By the way, you said it so beautifully because I was going to comment on that part. Because that is the most challenging part, admittedly. I mean, as a plaintiff's medical malpractice attorney, I can appreciate that there is, it goes against the healthcare provider's nature to say, we think you should get a lawyer to explore your rights. But there are so many reasons, in addition to the really important reasons that Rick mentioned, that it's essential. And it includes that the integrity of this program is really also very much contingent upon the trust that is built up. Because what happens at these cases, and we saw these actors played out so well, there's such emotions running that, can they make rational decisions? Is there an imbalance of knowledge, if not power, that goes on in this dynamic that everybody needs to be sensitive to? But more practically speaking, you also have to think about, in this case, this baby died. Other times the baby is brain damaged, in which case you're talking about long-term care needs, which come with their own set of costs, which need to be evaluated by professionals who are not attorneys, actually, but life care planners and even economists. You also have Medicare and Mass Health liens very often in these cases. So you may have a small case where you say, here's $100,000. That Medicare or Mass Health lien is automatic. So they might get a notice from Mass Health, Medicaid, we call it Mass Health here, where they say, you owe us $60,000 for your treatment. And so that $100,000 gets reduced to $40,000. That's not good. And finally, of course, there's a settlement agreement that must always be signed by the patient. And in that settlement agreement or release, there's frequently, I think almost always, a confidentiality provision, which, if breached, means that the settlement has to be given back. Now, that patient may not know what a breach means, and especially in the situation where you have a language issue. It's really important that they understand. They can't post this on Facebook. They can't tell their friends. These are things that a lawyer can help them process. Now, the list that was referred to in the simulation and by Rick is one that I and others have helped to develop because despite what many people, I think, fear is that lawyers are there to be obstacles or somehow to inhibit the process, there are many of us who, and in this room, who are facilitators. And this list are people whom we have cultivated of lawyers who do this kind of work, who consider themselves, like I do, a patient safety advocate first and foremost, who, by the way, importantly, are willing to be very flexible in their fee, because taking a very large percentage of what might be a small settlement, when you manage to do that with a letter and a few phone calls and a few meetings, frankly, would be unconscionable. And so the people on this list sign a document that says they are committed to a flexible fee arrangement and that they are open to this whole concept of transparency and disclosure. So that's a long answer, Rick, to your point. But I want to say in conclusion, I am so proud to be part of MACRMI. I'm the Mass Bar Association's representative, to collaborate with people like Rick and Alan Woodward and Michelle Mello and Segal Bell, and I see Lucian Leap over there, is a real pleasure because these folks are really the heroes of this movement. So I commend you for continuously every year promoting this important concept.
Thank you. Yes? I just want to add... Let's get a microphone.
I don't want to dispute anything that council said, but I do want to add, just so we have kind of a full amount of detail and fact. CRICO, our claim reps are the ones that negotiate settlements. So no matter if we retain lawyers or not, they're the ones that negotiate. And I will tell you, Patty, like most of our claim reps, have a wealth of experience. They've probably attended more trials than any trial lawyer. And they've probably, I know they've negotiated more cases than any of these lawyers. And I will tell you also is they probably understand the medicine equally to the level of our lawyers. So when somebody like Patty Hanks, who I'm very proud of, I think she does an amazing job and she's pretty much an expert in the field of OB, she spends her time, and when we need counsel to go, and I think this one, Patty can expand on this, we probably did have to get court to approve this. We get counsel to do that and do all the legal aspects to prepare the release, to confirm all that. But as far as the negotiation, I would put Patty up to any attorney and say that she's a lot more, she's better equipped, she's very even-tempered and very empathetic. So I don't want to minimize the need to hire counsel, and I'm sure I have to, you know, CRICO always says if you want counsel, yes, please. We're asking for it because there is a understanding or lack of understanding from the legal perspective. But our claim reps are very qualified, very experienced, very empathetic, very knowledgeable, and have gone through trials, so understand the trial and litigation process, understand going through mediators, and oftentimes we'll get mediators and people to work this out. So I just want to make sure that you understand that process, that there's never, ever, and I believe this with all my heart, I've only been at CRICO for 10 years, Patty's been here much more, we never, ever want to just get it on the cheap. That's not, we're captive, that's not our focus.
So I'm glad you're talking about this because we confronted a tough question right out of the chute. And that is the notion that you can represent both sides, or you can represent the interests of both sides. And I made a tactical decision right up front. We were never going to do that. We were always going to say to patients, we can't give you advice, we can't be your lawyer, we can tell you what we think is fair, but we can't help you with that. Do you have a similar divide, or do you feel that that is an undue rigidity about the boundary?
Well, I'll tell you that the way our claim reps analyze the value of a case doesn't vary whether there's an attorney or not. And so they're going to value it, and quite honestly, if an attorney wants this, and we feel it's value, then we may not settle it. It's not that we're looking at a case going, we want it on the cheap. Yeah. We're looking at a case at how these are valued, how we negotiate, and to try to compensate the patient. So I don't believe there's a bias to say that we're preventing them. In fact, quite honestly, I think because on many of these care pro cases, we offer, we suggest, we refer them to the MACRMI website, all of that stuff. And they choose, they want to do it on their own.
No, I understand.
And so I think they come in and feel that they're heard. Yeah. They feel that they are comfortable. I remember Patty doing this case, and that family left very happy. I mean, not happy, obviously never, but very satisfied, and I think affirmed by the process. And so I don't believe, I mean, again, 35 years doing this, you know, they're there to, with the wealth of knowledge and to understand. And if they ever feel that the family doesn't understand, I mean, obviously she got translators like crazy, and there's you know, 85 more cases that we have of care cases that we've gone through this process, because we keep a list of every single care program and care case in CRICO that comes through. So I mean, granted, I'm defending our people,
and I don't want you to feel defensive, but just let me share you this example. We had a 32-year-old mom, nurse, one of our own, highly regarded, and our orthopedic surgeon made a terrible mistake. It left her ambulating with crutches probably the rest of her life. I worked with that lady all the way through her rehab and everything else, and she steadfastly refused to get a lawyer. Unbeknownst to me, she was convinced if she hired a lawyer, we would fire her. We finally got to a point, her first name was Corey, and we finally got to a point where I said, Corey, this case is way too big, and I can't go forward with you unrepresented. And when I heard that she was worried about that, we gave her all the reassurances, and I gave her a list, and she hired a lawyer whose name is George Gugazian and happened to be our past state bar president, the dean of malpractice lawyers. I thought that case was worth $800,000. By the time George had gotten an economist, and all straight up people, this was not a slimy kind of a exaggerated workup to get me to bump it up. I finally settled that case for $1.4 million. I was off by $600,000. And I later found out, George said to her, Boothman is already at the table. It would be inappropriate to even sign a contingency. I'll bill you a fair hourly rate. His fee for doing all that was $4,200, which later I thought to myself, that's the most noble thing I've ever seen on $1 million case in Michigan. The fee would have been $600,000 or thereabouts. And I said to him, I'll pay your fee. But my point is, I've been at this 40 years and I've litigated them and I've done everything else, but I still missed that mark. And I think there's a danger in thinking that you can represent both sides. In certain circumstances are all right, but I think that's a concern.
I just quickly, Megan Tapley, also from CRICO. I think just to add to what Elaine said, we make it very clear that we're not working on both sides of the V.
That's good.
And to the extent patients ask, can you answer this question for me? And we're blending over to that side. We make it very clear, we can't answer that question for you because,
Good.
you know, we're on the wrong side of the V now. And to the extent, you know, they're going that direction, we tell them, we can't advise you of that. And we encourage people to get lawyers. And in particular, recently on a care case, we were working with a patient, and Jeff showed up actually representing the patient, and we're continuing to work that case, and now we'll work with Jeff. So we do it, you know, regardless. We encourage people to get attorneys.
Okay, I think this is a great conversation, but actually we have some other topics that we did want to get to, if that's okay. But we're happy to continue this.
We should talk at lunch.
Yes, and then that's why we have these stickers, right? So then we can talk about this after. But Patty, we actually did want to talk to you a little bit about how the resolution meeting went and how you felt that the patients felt at that meeting and that kind of thing.
Sure, thanks. When I initially met with the mom and dad, the father was still so angry. I mean, really intensely angry. And he was distraught that his wife was afraid to get pregnant again. I mean, this was a really serious thing. And he was impressing how I had to let him vent. And I let him vent because in order to create a collaborative communication with him, he needed to know, as Rick alluded to earlier, that he was heard. I wanted him to vent, to let him know I heard him so that this was going to be a fair resolution. Once he did that, I empathized with their loss. I told them I truly hoped that they would have another baby, and we eventually reached a settlement figure. And the settlement figure is based on all of the data that we have at CRICO of similar cases. It's never on the cheap. That gives me the hives. But that people would do that. But in the end, he was no longer angry when we reached the settlement. Still anxious, but appreciative. And the mother, when I went to say goodbye to her, she just naturally hugged me and was genuinely appreciative. So I think it was the full loop of the empathy that the CARES program wants to start the process at the hospital. We're sort of we are at the end of it, but to continue the empathy and work with these people to a very fair resolution.
So Patty, I'm so glad you said this, because as an experienced claims person, you know that money is a proxy for so many amorphous things. When you said once the anger starts to dissipate, you can literally feel everybody's shoulders go down, and now you can have a much different quality of conversation about what it takes to compensate.
Yeah, and I said to them, there's no amount of money in the world that could ever come, I literally use those words, but we want to help you move on in the future. So we want you to get past this sad time. And they desperately do. They really want to get past it. And then you're both talking about the same thing at that time. How are we going to get past it? So, listen to them, empathize, and the process works.
Yeah, it does.
Thanks, Patty.
Any other comments from you folks? When you talk a little bit about the resolution. Does it ever come back to you because they're not able to reach a resolution on money, or whatever else is involved?
When I resolve cases, first of all, let me just tell you that hospitals wouldn't be anything without the employees or the patients. So I need to make a comment about the cheap too, because that is your reputation going forward. And if anybody doesn't go through a lawyer, doesn't get the resolution that they want, this is the relationship that you've lost with a patient, and that reverberates out to the community, and you've lost not just one, you've lost a lot of people. So that's something that we need to remember as we resolve cases. And I don't remember a case that hasn't been resolved that's come to me one way or another, whether it's gone through a resolution that I have participated in, or whether it's gone on to a trial. Cases do come to an end. But cases that come to me, I usually explain to patients exactly how I come to the number that I come to. I have objective criteria and that I try to explain to them so that they'll understand. If they want to see my research, I will offer it to them. I've offered cases to them and told them exactly what it is in their own specific individual case that leads me to the dollar amount one way or the other, so that they'll understand where I'm coming from. And I welcome any challenges. And it's interesting that people do begin to negotiate. They do have their own feelings and their own value on what it means to them. And I appreciate that, because I'm never in their shoes. I can't feel that they can. And that's value to them, and it says something to me, and we usually reach a conclusion.
Pat?
The thing I was going to just say is how sad I feel, and I know it's the same with the whole team that's here. If we have made a good faith attempt to have conversations with patients and families and explain what happened, and we know that we've done the right thing at our end about explaining the standard of care and communicating with them, and then when we get a 60L letter or we get a lawsuit, we feel sad, because we feel like we still move forward with the care program through this after the 60L process, but it just makes it a little more difficult, and we feel like we think to ourselves, well, what was different about the way that communication went with that family that made them feel like they had to go forward with a legal process? But then we try to remind ourselves that that's everyone's right, and that it's not the reason not to do this. The reason to do this is that it's the right thing to do, even if it results in future litigation. And it hasn't been our process that this has made anything different than it was before, except that we're doing the right thing. And now, instead of when cases end saying, I've worked in patient safety for many, many years, and always we would say, we're so sorry that this happened to you, and here's how we want to prevent this from happening to the next person, and then we would just cross our fingers and wait and see what happened. And this feels so much better to be able to say, we're so sorry that this happened to you. Here's what we're doing to make it so that it won't happen to the next person, but also let us make you whole. And it's for all cases. It's when the patient and family would have no reason to realize that they should be able to be made whole. So I think it's that intellectual honesty that is hard, but makes it really powerful to be doing this.
Patty, you lost your microphone? Okay, I just want to ask her one more operational question. Can I get her a microphone? And the question is, while that's coming down, how do you handle the non-monetary demands that you sometimes get from patients? I want somebody fired. I want to know that their license is gone. I mean, I've heard them all.
I don't have to answer those questions. That would be Pat. I tell them that's an internal hospital system. I can't have someone fired.
Families will want to know that. They'll want to know what was the process for this, the action with the clinician. And usually you can explain, like you would explain, most patients are employed in some way themselves, and you can explain that there are internal processes. Sometimes we'll do a little bit about what fair and just approaches are for our employees to do some education around that. But there's a protection for the clinicians as well, like any employee of any institution in the world. So we reassure the patient and family that we have a process for this, and that we followed our processes.
Good, thanks. We had a question back there?
Thank you. In listening to the patient, when the patient conversation, it felt to me at a very high literacy level, and I'm thinking a lot of my patient who would not be clear, even though you try to be clear, just from listening to that conversation, really would not have understand what you were trying to tell them, and they also from cultures were saying yes is easier than saying no. So one of the things, so there's two things I wanted to sort of see how you approach. How do you put literacy level of patient you deal with, and if they don't have a lawyer to represent them, especially if they have a low literacy, how are you making sure they actually understand what you're telling them?
And then I'll go.
Well, first of all, if there's culture or if there's a language barrier, those we try to address through interpreters or in any other way that we can. However, if it's the educational level that you're referring to, that's where you rephrase questions, you rephrase information, and you ask, did you understand that? Can you tell it back to me? Tell me in your own words if you understand what I've said. Tell me in your own words how you feel. When a case comes to me, even though I have heard about the case and there have been family meetings that I have not participated in, I tell the patient that I know about those meetings, but I ask them to please tell me in their own words what happened so that I can understand. Then I repeat it back to them to make sure that I've understood what they've said to me. And I usually take it upon myself not to put it on them as to their literacy level, but to my understanding, to make sure that I understand. So it's a matter of communicating well, and it's the going back and forth, the rephrasing, the reframing, the asking a question, and listening to hear and to understand, not to respond.
Okay, we have time for two more.
I just have a comment. This is a little delayed, but in response to Pat's comment about pathologists, I'm a pathologist. So
I saw her back there.
I especially like the I became a pathologist because I don't like talking to people. That's actually a direct quote from a focus group that was done on disclosure for pathologists at our national level, so you're not wrong. But I think what's interesting about that is that the example you gave was one where the error was made by the provider who already had a relationship with the patient. So often with pathology or other non-direct care providers, or even within regular care, the error could lie with someone who doesn't already have a relationship with the patient. And I think it makes things complex if the person who knows the patient isn't sort of technically equipped to answer subject expertise related questions that the patient or family may have. They may not be interested in getting into that level, but they may actually be, or the patient or family. So that's a challenge that we've had in pathology, but also other non-direct healthcare providers. We've had a little success with partnering with providers who have a relationship with patients. So you get that relationship piece, but then you also have a person there who can answer subject expertise questions about what actually technically went wrong. And to your paternalism point, in that case, you do have a little option to not necessarily be paternalistic, but you can select whoever you want from that group, pathology or whoever, who would be best able to answer those questions, because it doesn't have to be someone who knows the patient already, because they don't know anyone from that group. So it's not just someone who has good communication skills, but someone who you trust to be able to have a good conversation. And sometimes in our case, the provider who made the mistake is too upset to sort of have a good conversation. They might be overly blaming themselves, or they just might not be a good communicator. So you can select the right person. And I guess the last thing I would say is sometimes the needs change over time. So, the communication as one event hasn't really been our experience. Sometimes they're so upset at the time, but then 6 months, a year later, they might come back and say, I do want to sit with a pathologist and see the slides or understand what happened. So we really try, or we've had patients who say, we don't want to, but my daughter wants to meet with you. She wants to understand. So we really try and remain open to the patients' and families' needs over time and try and serve them best, even though we don't directly know the patients.
Thank you very much, Yael. Couldn't have said it better.
That was a wonderful simulation. I thought it was great. The only thing I thought was missing, of course, was no information about bereavement groups or how this would probably impact them emotionally.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not appropriate for that group, but really, like Sue said, they leave. Even though I thought it was great that they said this isn't your fault. Every patient and family leave with the shoulda, coulda, woulda, If they had done something different, maybe that baby would be alive. So I thought there was information about that, but I didn't know when in that or when in the process you let them know what you're going to do to make sure. I heard you say it, Pat, but in the simulation, when you give them the information about what they're going to do to make sure this doesn't happen to another family. Yeah. So I just didn't know when that happens in the process.
Is that normally part of your process?
And one last thing. I think somewhere along the line, because when I get in front of people, whatever information or questions I was going to ask goes out of my head. Something about being around people much smarter than me. It just happens, like all the time. So is ask them along their journey to write down their questions so next time we talk. I think that should be reiterated over and over again, that they write down their questions, because inevitably they will forget their questions.
Yeah.
Well, and Terry's point that she would remain the contact person is helpful in that regard.
Yeah. So we left out the whole part about what would happen if somebody does have a fetal loss of a baby. There's an entire process that happens that we couldn't really fit it in the simulation, just so that just to be reassured. It's very well done by our OB colleagues and our nurses in postpartum. So your second question is about when would we let the patient and family know about the corrective actions? So it could be in one of the subsequent conversations. It could be in the writing that they get around the serious reportable event. I still think this is a place where there needs to be, I think I said this last year, this is a place where there needs to be more work generally, is at what point, how Sue mentioned that 10 years after her event, she would like to still have somebody reach out in the month and say she was okay. We're so far from that. And a lot of the corrective actions that we promise to patients and families take months and months to implement, and we don't really have a marker where we say, let's circle back, because this corrective action is complete with that patient or family. There's certain markers that you could build in, but we just haven't done it in a regular way. So one thing that we hope is that at the time of the resolution with our colleagues at CRICO and people like Patty, one of the pieces of information that she would have is some of the things that have been done. But we don't, there's opportunity there, I think, to have a point person at the hospital reach back out. We just haven't hardwired it. So I think it's a really good point, and it's part of no one really likes the word resolution. We took a long time thinking about that. And you know that, Linda. But it's part of thinking about what is the next, like the next level of maturation of a safety system where you actually build in a way to have the corrective actions shared really broadly with the patient base. So.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much for this robust discussion. And thank you so much again, panelists and simulation actors. Let's give them another round of applause. Thank you. So now we have a lunch break. The lunches are boxed lunches, so we have a 15-minute break. If you could come back in here at 1, you can bring your lunches in here, and you'll hear a little bit from our data team about the latest pilot data, and we'll have an address from Rick Boothman and some closing comments. So see you at 1.